Hello, everybody. My name is Julian Clavier from North Point Partners, and I am so glad to have you join us for today's webinar about steps to an effective digital church strategy. And we have none other than Justin Piercy. How you doing, Justin?
Good. How you doing, Julian?
Great. Thank you so much for joining us. So Justin is used to be the service programming director for Connexus Church. And because he's done so well in helping to create a digital church strategy with them and for them, he actually has a new title, which is Digital Ministry Director. So just delighted to have you with us, Justin. Thank you so much for joining us again. And as we talk about digital church strategy, we recognize that everybody's coming from different contexts and different cultures today. And so we at North Point have a way to talk about that. We say there's principles, practices, and preferences. And we recognize that everybody is not from the same context and culture. So a principle is what we feel like applies across context and culture. A practice is how do we apply this as leaders in our context and culture. And then a preference is usually what we argue about, which is our opinions. So as Justin talks today, I want you as leaders to say, hey, how does this principle apply in my context and my culture? And we're going to talk about some real practical things as well. So hopefully it will be super practical and helpful. And if you are joining us, we'd love to know where you're coming from in the chat, your name, where you're coming from, and then questions that you have, because after we get done hearing from Justin, we're going to do some Q&A at the end. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. We are delighted to have you. So, Justin, I'd love to dive right in. So my first question is, what is the first step to creating an effective digital church strategy?
Yeah, totally. Well, this is a starting point that's going to be universal wherever you're at with your church, with your strategy, however it looks. You want to think like the people that you're trying to reach with your church. And I find that so often we all fall into this trap with our digital spaces. We can be so good with it with our physical spaces and so bad at it online. We really start to have this drift where we think like insiders. So really in the digital space, we really got to try and buck this thinking where we are thinking like, what do people need to know? People need to know this. And that's that's thinking that begins with us. What we need to do is we need to think like the people who we're trying to reach out there. What are their felt needs? What do they care about? What are they looking for online? And then we got to try and anticipate those needs and give it to them before they even realize, that they're looking for it. And rather than just promoting events that we have going on. So that's, every church falls into that trap, and our church included, and we are always trying to push against that one. And that's the kind of the thing that if you can get that right, you can build everything else off of it.
So what would be some practical ways that we could apply that? Maybe think about, there's technology, thinking about the digital space, maybe YouTube or some other technologies that we are experimenting with already.
Yeah, totally. So just from like what are we doing online? If you're using your social media or your YouTube channel like a bulletin board for events that your church has going on, that's probably not the right approach. We try and title all of our content and our series, our services, based on what people might be looking for. And I can give you an example, Julian, of a service that we put on YouTube, and we titled it "My Partner Blames Me for Everything." And it was on relationships. And obviously the person who was speaking, we would hope that that wasn't the reality for their marriage, but that's what people put into YouTube. We did our keyword research, and we really tried to go after this felt need of what people were looking for when they were looking online, rather than putting this, super arty, series title out there with a graphic. An unchurched person might not know or care what you're talking about, but you really want to go and go after the things that those people are looking for, however you define your target demographic.
So in terms of digital space, YouTube is pretty significant, and we might be able to have time later to dig into that.
Absolutely.
What about like typical message series? And we've been doing the same thing for a while, taking it from the physical. Now we're thinking digital. We just slap that onto our website or YouTube somewhere. Any recommendations or thoughts about practically to apply this principle?
Yeah. So we use several keywording tools. If you don't know what that is, you got to check it out. On YouTube, vidIQ is one that you can sign up for today. Morning Fame is one that you can get into as well. There are other, SEO keywording tools that you can just go in and sign up for them and start typing things in and seeing, oh, we thought this would be a good title, but it turns out that like the search volume on that is like 1/10. Like people aren't looking for that, but they are really looking for this other thing. So that's something that you can do today to start trying to gauge interest. Google Trends is another thing that you can go to. It's free online, and you can just type in different phrases, and you can see what the interest is by geography in certain key phrases. So, those are some things, when you talk about YouTube and like reaching, people with your key phrases, tagging, like all that stuff is really important, but it has to go back to, you need to be thinking like the people you're trying to reach. If it's like, you're trying to reach unchurched people and your keyword is, James chapter 1, part 1, you're going to hit a certain audience, but it's not going to be an unchurched audience. So you really need to try and identify what is the felt need, start there, marry up your content with it, and then keyword optimize it using a tool.
That's great. So a question that I had originally when we were talking, and I'm sure a lot of people have, is, so in a physical space, we're just learning how to listen to outsiders. So how in the world am I supposed to do that from a digital space? How do I understand what people are thinking, people I'm trying to reach? What are they thinking in a digital space? What do I learn?
Well, number one, you can ask people. I mean, that's a good place to start. But you got to try and figure out, where are the people who you are trying to reach in your church? Where are they shopping? What kind of cars are they driving? What kind of jobs do they have? If maybe, you're in, kind of a more rural setting, those peoples are going to have a very different set of things that they're interested in than people who are living in a metropolitan or a suburban setting. And you really need to try and figure out, number one, who are the people that they are, identify them, right down to an age, family stage, get as specific as you can. It'll only help you, and narrow in on those, that kind of segments, needs, wants, and desires, hopes, dreams. Sit around, brainstorm them. You can look up, like Barna Research has a lot of stuff on how to, identify your targets and what certain demographics are dealing with. That's a good organization to look at as well. But we got to start there rather than starting with the content that we're excited about.
So the other area that I'm thinking about for us, and a lot of organizations have been struggling, is how do we think through our service programming differently as we think about the people we're trying to reach digitally? How have you got, what hacks or ways have you, learned to apply this principle in that area?
Yeah. Well, I know we've talked a lot about that, Julian, and if there is anything that I leave out here that you think would be helpful, jump in by all means. But I think the main thing here is you got to remember that you're talking to a person on the other end of a screen. You're not giving people a fishbowl into a service. You're actually, when you're online in an online service, you have the opportunity to talk directly to someone. If you're sitting at home or in the office right now, your perception is I'm talking directly to you, not giving a talk to a whole group of people. So you got to address people like that. Give them specific calls to action. Ask them to subscribe or engage them by name. One of the things that we do in our services for our digital hosts is we let them see the chat. They have a screen up in front of them. We've put it on camera a couple times, but they actually call out people who they see in the chat, and it really closes that gap of intimacy. We also shortened our sermon to try and match how long people will watch for online. Transitions are a lot tighter. We try and maximize the amount of time that we have people on camera. So rather than, just having, after service, we go to slides until the next service, we try and have people on camera talking to the audience as much as possible, because we know that that will engage people. So those are just some service programming hacks that we've done. I could go on and on. We've tried so many things, Julian, but those are some of the things that just come to mind really quickly off the bat.
Well, another area I know a lot of people are hearing about or learning about or experiencing from a digital world is content marketing. What about applying some of those areas around that in terms of, maybe explain what it is and then how we can begin to apply it in this context?
Yeah, totally. So content marketing, basically, if you think of it like blogging or putting content on your website to try and get people who are looking for a specific thing. So say, you want to do, you want to get some people into your system who are trying to figure out parenting. So you can create a lot of content, written content. You can pull it from a family series, have a volunteer rewrite it. so that you're not manufacturing brand new content. It can be based on the sermon, and you just publish content, after content. And what will happen is that'll start to appear in search engines. People will start to find it. They'll start to find their way to your website. And then you want to hook them once they're there with how the content is written. Offer them some value in exchange for maybe them giving you their email address, stuff like that. That is a tool that is really powerful to try and reach people. It doesn't, fly out of the gate like a service where, hundreds of people come, but that's the type of strategy that yields a lot of return over time. Digital really is a long play. It's not a short game. So, building up that content library on your website. Also, another point on this, Julian, is social media. Like I said, we tend to treat our social media like a billboard. Like, hey, we have this event. What do people need to know? Oh, people should come to this. And that's how we tend to think of it as church leaders. Whereas really, we need to flip that script of how are we putting content out there on social media that people are going to want to share with their friends, that people are going to find encouraging, so that when somebody who has no context of who we are lands on our Instagram, on our Facebook, they're going to feel like, I want more of this in my life. I want to follow this account. And that very often can be somebody's first step into our ministry. But if we're always using it to try and get our people to do things, then that's a critical mistake.
It seems like there's a ton of areas that you can just dive deep into this question or this step. So thinking like people we're trying to reach is the first step, thinking like people we're trying to reach. So what's the second step to creating an effective digital church strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we can reach as many people as we want online. And if we don't have a clear path for them to integrate or assimilate, it's all for naught. You can reach 10,000 people on Instagram, and if 0 of them plug into your church, you may as well have not done anything. You need to create steps where people can know what they need to do and take that step quickly and easily. And it's really interesting. Last year, almost a year ago, when COVID hit, everybody went online. We saw all these new digital guests coming to our church. And what we found is, as in our church, was that our kind of default was to give that audience next steps to take, but we were giving them the same next steps that we would give them in person. And it's like, people who are watching you for the very first time on YouTube, they're not going to give, they're not going to serve, they're not going to join a small group likely. They might share it with a friend, but they're not going to invite a friend to attend your church in person, especially in the middle of COVID. So we really had to rethink what all those next steps were for a digital context. And once we started realizing that all of those people are in a very, very different place in their journey with us than the people who were joining us for the first time in person, it all became a lot easier after that point.
So what are the things that we need to, if we're looking at a different audience, what do we need to not begin expecting from this new audience that maybe we were expecting from our old audience?
Well, I think you can not expect them to show up in person right away, typically. You can probably not expect them to give you their home address and how many children they have in their household or the names of their children, all these types of things where if you have a new guest and they come to your welcome desk and you have them fill out a card or register their kids for the childcare program to get a gift, a new person online is not going to be giving you that level of information. So we really had to lower the bar in terms of what we were expecting from our new guests. And that really helped us redefine what these steps look like. For a new person online, the steps should be a lot closer and a lot smaller. And there should be a lot more of them on their way to, a deeper level of integration with our church. The funny thing is, this was true before COVID. And I think we just didn't really think about it because we had people coming through our doors every week. And then once everybody was online, we really started paying attention to this and realized, hey, this is like true all the time. So, things like subscribing to a YouTube channel, getting on a mailing list, following a church on Instagram, a little bit further down the line, joining a short-term online group that's topical. Things like that are steps that a person can take on their way to the more invested steps of serving, joining a long-term group. We're experimenting with courses as well right now. That's another thing we're looking at. So those are some things, Julian, where the digital next steps don't and shouldn't mirror physical next steps.
It's just totally reframing the way we've thought about next steps and assimilation. And yeah, it's crazy. So for you guys, when you're thinking about these next steps, and you mentioned a few of them, you want to give an example of what you might have today, something that flows all the way to, and then when you get their information, you said you lower the bar. What are the few things you're actually asking for?
Yeah. So the first one is always email. Like YouTube follow is great. Instagram follow is great. We can't correspond with that person. So the place in our integration model where they kind of jump tiers is the first time they identify themselves with us in whatever way that looks like. So that can be getting an email, getting a phone number, that type of thing. One of the ways that we do that is most effective in our services is providing what's called a lead magnet. So we talk about these things in our services. If you don't know what that is, a lead magnet is basically, a value add tool that you offer to people for free. We did a series on relationships, and it was like how to build great friendships, a great circle of friends, or how to navigate conflict. And we would provide these free tools, really just a digital download PDF. We'd say, hey, if you want this, we think it'd be very helpful for you. You can download it for free. Just give us your email or whatever. And then they would get that and give us their email in return. It's a value exchange. And then that gives you an entry point for that person. From there, you start offering them other things on your email list, like, if we're doing a starting point course, or, any other type of course, or if, we have, we try different things all the time. We've done volunteer outreach events for people who are in our area where, restrictions allowing. We do like a community action thing. That's been a great on-ramp for new people as well who are local to us. The people who are ready for more, they'll engage if you're engaging with them. So it's like if you lower that bar, you just want to keep moving people along. Don't just let your email list grow and then never try and move people further along in their journey with you. You want to keep engaging with them. But you want to offer a lot of different ways to do that.
So you've mentioned a lot of things, subscribes and follows and assimilation. And so all these are new terms potentially that might mean something different in the digital world than we're talking about in the physical world.
Yes.
So what about terms and alignment? How do we get on the same page as a team in church? Because I might be, what if I'm a pastor of one here and I'm trying to figure out, all right, that's great, Justin, you've got a team. And you at North Point, that's great, you've got a large organization. So how am I going to do that, in my context? So what are some practical ways we can get on the same page?
Yeah, totally. I really got to give credit to our lead pastor for this because he flagged this with our team right away. Jeff is fantastic. He's led really well through the last year at our church. And he realized right away, when Justin talks about engagement and he's talking about, something that's happening online, that might not translate to what the rest of the team considers engagement, or what a small group director considers engagement, or somebody in student ministry considers engagement. So actually defining what that language is across the whole team is something that if you're a lead pastor, do that for the sake of your team, because it really makes a big difference. And even if not everybody agrees with every definition, you can say, hey, let's just use these so we're all talking the same language here and we know if we're winning or not. Because otherwise, you might have one person over here saying, hey, we're like killing on our engagement. Or you might have another person who's sitting over here who say, hey, our engagement is in the tank. And they might be missing each other in their communication just because that definition hasn't been defined. So I would say that is a definite step one. Start there, and everything after that will go easier from a team perspective for you.
Oh, that's great. So the first step you were talking about was think like the people we're trying to reach. And once we begin to reach them, then we're thinking, all right, what are clear next steps and integration paths that are digital processes that we can connect them? And it's going to look totally different than it's done in the past. We need to make sure that our language and terms are all aligned.
Absolutely.
So what's the third step to creating an effective digital church strategy?
Well, a lot of churches stop after those two steps because, you can feel like, hey, if we're reaching people online and we have a clear path, it's mapped out, there's multiple paths that people can follow from, first getting to know us, caring about us digitally to, okay, they're maybe even attending in person now. You can feel like that you're doing great and you are doing great. But if you aren't watching your analytics, man, you are leaving a lot on the field. And that's something that I'm personally really convicted about is anybody who's doing anything digital, goodness, everything digital online is quantifiable. So you got to get in there and measure it.
That's worth saying it again. Everything digital and online is quantifiable. So we
Yeah.
can't run or hide from our numbers anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, and I mean, any pastor who watches their views on online services when they're only meeting online knows this. It's like you can really ride that wave in a bad way. But what I always tell churches is, you got to choose your benchmark analytics, like choose the ones that matter to you. Don't choose the ones that don't really mean anything. Choose the ones that you can derive action from. And then you want to measure your percentage change over time. You don't want to care. You don't want to compare about the number of views that you get versus, the mega church, a county over or whatever. You want to look at, hey, are we moving in the right direction or are we slipping backward? And that's really where we've seen a lot of value is like we establish our benchmark. Doesn't matter if we feel good about it, don't feel good about it. It's a benchmark. It is what it is. And then you measure, hey, are we moving forward here or are we moving backward?
That's great. The world of digital has a whole new vocabulary as well when you talk about metrics.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely.
So what would you recommend as folks are listening to this thinking, okay, now I got to measure, it used to be attendance, it used to be giving, it used to be, maybe it's conversions in groups, and now it's a whole different world. So what do you feel like are some of the key metrics that people need to be measuring?
Yeah. So one thing is I feel like every church needs to establish if you're going to measure digital attendance, you just need to figure out like one or two metrics of how you're doing that. And we do that at Connexus. We measure. We have consolidated our audience to a single platform. We drive everything off YouTube. We even shut Facebook down a couple of weeks ago. Basically,
more about that.
Yeah, I can answer a question about that in the Q&A if there is one. That was very strategic decision for our service streaming anyway. And basically what we do is we measure the peak concurrent viewers. So the most amount of viewers that are there at one time. That's how we measure our live stream attendance. It's a lot smaller of a number than looking at the whole views, but somebody can come in for 30 seconds and then leave and they count as a view. Did that person really attend your service online or not? So, that is something that, once we kind of all got around a table and we said, this is how we're going to measure our in-service attendance, then that kind of made things a little bit easier in terms of establishing are we moving forward or backward. Also, engagement, which on video content is the best way to gauge it is average watch time. So if you have a sermon where your average watch time is 10 minutes and one where it's 22 minutes, your whole audience engaged very differently in that content. And there can be several reasons why, but you want to be paying attention to that number. Measuring reach is another really important one. So most platforms will call that impressions, Julian. And basically that's like how many people are seeing your content.
So it's like how many people scrolled through or saw it or popped up on their Instagram or Facebook.
Yeah, exactly. Or like how many people did YouTube show it to, that type of thing. And then you can measure out of that number, how many people took action. That's another thing that we look at. And then we look at engagement steps, number of follows, number of subscribes, number of emails, new emails in our database. Those are all metrics that we pay pretty close attention to. Number of shares is another good one. Did people feel like this was content worth sharing? And you can, it's plain to see, like you get a number of shares on your content. So if it was worth sharing or not by what you see in your dashboards. So, those are some examples of specific metrics that we watch. I'm happy to answer any questions about that because I could talk data all day. I like it. And I think that churches miss a lot when they don't look at it. But if you are like, I get also church leaders out there, all of those names and numbers is overwhelming. The first step is to get in there and look. Even if you don't like what you think, you might not like what you see, this is how we move the ball forward. You can't move the ball forward if you don't know where it is. So you got to get in your analytics and see how you're doing.
What are some analytics that you guys have measured, Justin, that you've actually made changes based upon learnings?
Yeah. Average watch time was a big one. So that we were seeing that, on average, people were watching our sermon. Our core audience was like a 20 to 25 minute average watch time. And we were delivering a 45-minute sermon. So we just did the math there and we're like, well, we'd rather have people watch 90% of our sermon than 50%. So we shortened it up. We also could see on our peak concurrent viewers, we could see people dropping off when we did too much music in a row. So we did a little bit less music online versus what we might do in person. Another one, we saw groups of visitors arriving at our website on the hour, every hour, kind of regardless of when our service times were. So we made the pivot on our digital services to retime them to cooperate with that pattern. So obviously people are arriving there at that time for a reason. And we thought it's probably because they're assuming a service is starting. So we just decided to cooperate with that. So now our service times are 8, 9, 10, and 11 a.m. Eastern for our digital services. So those are some examples. We've made a lot of other ones. The Facebook, shutting down the Facebook for our live stream was...
Yeah, I love it. Why don't we dig into that one? I'm looking here. My team's sending me a couple of questions that are coming in on the chat. So keep sending those questions in. We'll try to answer a few that we can here. But it's in terms of Facebook, what made that decision in terms of going away from Facebook to YouTube? Would love to hear about that.
Yeah, totally. So the long and short of it is, we discovered by looking at our average watch time of the same content by platform that people were engaging with us for way shorter time on Facebook on the live stream. On YouTube, we would see average watch times of 15 to 25 minutes. And on Facebook, it was typically less than 3 minutes. So, Facebook does a really good job. I got to give them credit of making it feel like a more engaged platform, because they have the bubbles that float up. They tell you when certain people are joining. They give you suggested comments. Let me tell you the dirty little secret about Facebook. What Facebook wants is to get you engaging with the most amount of content as possible. That's why they suggest comments for you. So you can just click a button and there's a comment rather than you needing to type it out. That's why when you're watching a video on Facebook, you can keep scrolling because they want you to be seeing other stuff and engaging with it while you're watching a video. The problem is, for a church service that is running for, anywhere 30 to 60 to 70 minutes, if somebody sees a video on Facebook and it's a meme video or a fail video or whatever, and they start playing it, your church service is gone. YouTube, on the other hand, wants you to stay on the platform for the longest amount of time as possible. So whatever is going to keep you on the platform, YouTube is going to keep showing to you. And church services are well wired to keep people watching, especially their core audience. So we made the decision, we looked at it. Our average watch time on Facebook was less than 3 minutes. And on YouTube, it was like 20 minutes. So we're like, this is not getting us anything. So we shut it down and we consolidated our audience over to YouTube, which pushed our content further on YouTube because there was more people engaging with it there.
No, that's super helpful. So why don't we, if you're good with it, so we've talked about think like the people we're trying to reach.
Mm-hmm.
Step number 1. Step number 2, begin to create clear integration paths and next steps for our digital audience.
Yep.
Step 3, begin to look at the metrics.
Absolutely.
See what's actually going on out there that we can quantify. That's great. So
yeah,
a couple other questions I'd love to, if you got time, if you're game for it, let's tackle a few of these. All right. Thank you everybody for bringing your questions. So I've got Daryl LeBlanc here. Daryl says, what's the optimal length for a sermon online and a service?
Yeah. So
thanks, Daryl.
I'll tell you, that may change for you versus what is true for my audience. Every audience is different. So what I would do is, if you're not on YouTube already, I would start posting some content on there, and see how long people watch it. If you're posting a huge long church service and people are only watching 10 minutes, you should probably consider shortening it. What I will say is people engage with live content on YouTube differently than they engage with on-demand content. So when people are engaging with something live, they're engaging with an event. However, when people are looking for stuff on demand, you don't normally go back and watch a full event live that was live on demand. Usually what you do, well, you might, but you'll probably skip through to get to the parts that you want. So what we started doing is we stream our service live, but then we cut it down to the sermon only. We post that. Then we take the music that we did on that day and we post those as separate music videos. Again, this is a content format that's extremely native to YouTube. So basically we're taking the service and chopping it up and posting the different elements on our YouTube channel, because when people are looking for stuff after the fact, they want to watch what they want to watch. And if they want to see that song that was on the weekend, that's what they want to see. So let's just give it to them.
You guys, so you've been doing this for some years, and I'm grateful that we have you on for this kind of insight, because I feel like this is kind of gold, because we've all been either putting just our messages or our whole services online for a while. And so the way you break it up right there sounds super helpful.
Yeah. Like if we do a special video or a story, those are another, because what happens, if you have a story in a church service, people will be really impacted by it during the church service. But then what happens is they're talking to a friend and they say, "Oh, I saw this great story at church." So then they go on your YouTube channel looking for the story. They don't look for the service. So we give them that story, and then it's a way easier share than it would be if they were trying to share this church service and say, "Oh, go to the 23-minute mark. That's where it is."
Oh yeah, that's not as helpful. So I've got another question here from Seth Hines. Thank you, Seth, for your question. It says, how have you best engaged the live stream audience that watches on a smart TV? So some of us use Apple TVs or any kind of smart TV. We might have our service up there. So it's a great question, Seth. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, it's a good question, Seth. And I'll tell you, we've seen the patterns that you see. Smart TV watchers watch for the longest. That's our segment, who they watch for the longest amount of time, but they don't chat because it's on a TV. So we tell people that, if they're watching and they want to chat, to get a second device, and it's not weird to do that. They're watching a live event and they're there for church. If they start watching you, then they can pull up another device and start chatting on it. That's been fairly successful, but it isn't actually bad that, somebody who's watching on a smart TV is not chatting, because it is a bit of a con, but you also get the advantage of they're probably going to watch for longer than other people, which is good for you. So it is a bit of a trade-off there, but that's probably the best tip. I'm assuming you're talking about engaging in other ways. We tell them to just grab a second device and chat in that way.
That's great. Thank you for that question. Samantha Barrett has a question here. So if your pastor and team is not passionate about re-envisioning your digital strategy, which I imagine a lot of you on this call, if you're not lead pastor, probably feel that pain that Samantha's sharing, about modifying their in-person services to address the online needs, how would you walk down that road? It's kind of how would you bring influence towards this direction?
Yeah, I would figure out where you can experiment. And it wasn't our lead pastor was all bought in on YouTube from day one. He wasn't. I had to, do some experiments, show him data, show him why this was a platform that we should consider. We experimented on the sidelines. And then once we had the data to prove what we thought was likely true, it was a much easier sell. Lead pastors want to increase the number of bums in the seats, and they want to increase the financial income of the church. Every leader wants to grow. So if you can show them how the digital strategy is actually going to help them grow their church, your church, with real data, then, making steps in your digital strategy become a lot easier of a sell.
Thanks for sharing that, Samantha. I think a lot of people can relate to your challenge. Mm-hmm. So Emily Cummins is bringing in a question that says, what churches are rocking it on social media right now? who do I need to follow? Who do we want to learn from? So where do you see out there in the church world, whether it can be small, big, large? That's what's the crazy thing about digital strategy. Who do you feel like would be a good follow for people to learn from?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we are always looking at both large and small churches. So I would start with following, it's easy to follow, the North Points, the Life churches, the Elevations, the VU churches, like transformation churches, like all of these churches have their strengths and weaknesses. What you want to do is you want to look at all of the content that they post and recognize that everything that every account posts is not either going to be good or bad. There's going to be wins or fails. So you want to look across the board, and you want to see, when I am going on their Instagram, on a browser on Instagram, you can see how many likes a picture has. So you can see, this one picture that Life Church posted got like 10 times the amount of likes as it normally does. Why might that be? Or you go on North Point's YouTube channel and you say, hey, this video from like 3 months ago has like 4 times the number of views as all their other videos. Why might that be? And the nice thing is you can play that game on large and small churches, where you look at, a smaller church who you feel like, hey, I like these guys' presence online. And when I go and check out their stuff, it's clear that this one thing they did had a big impact. And you can take notes from that. That's a lot of what we do.
That's great. And thank you for asking that. So another question here. It says, when you titled the YouTube video, my partner, it's from Daryl LeBlanc. Thank you, Daryl. Another question. When you titled the YouTube video, my partner blames me for everything. What was the name of your sermon? And did your digital team come up with that name, or did you use SEO for that? Search optimization keywords.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a hybrid. So it was a relationship series. It was all on how to navigate tension in relationships. The series was called I Didn't Sign Up for This. So it was basically a relational series. We didn't actually use that phrase, I don't think, in any of our keyword optimization. We kind of narrowed in each week a little bit narrower on what we were shooting for. So that was a series title. And what we did is we took the content of that week, gave it to our digital team, and we started plunking keywords into these tools. And we started seeing, hey, okay, this one is better than that one. Okay, this one is a little bit better than that one. And we kind of went down the rabbit hole a little bit until we feel like, okay, this one matches the content and it's got the highest volume for the lowest competition. Really, that's the sweet spot where you want to look for search terms that have high volume and not a lot of competition. The trick is you can go down that road and just end up with clickbaity titles, if you go too far. What you want is you really want to match the intent of the click. That's something that people in SEO world talk a lot about. You want to match intent of search. So whatever your title ends up being, you want to make sure that when people land on the content, it's going to match what they're expecting to get.
Love that.
So that's real the balance.
That's great,
Yeah.
Justin.
Yep.
So I've got one more question for you, kind of a last question. But
Sure.
Before I do, I want to address everybody and kind of say that a lot of you, we recognize, are probably doing some amazing things in your church today. Like, we recognize that you're probably killing it with your web online service. Maybe it's your website, maybe it's your social media, and you've got systems for how you audit and evaluate that. And we think that's awesome. So, because our heart is that you would thrive so your churches could grow. And maybe you're someone out there that's like, well, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm trying to figure this thing out. I would love help. I would love to help someone to actually help me about my specific website or our social media or our unique, online service. So what we're going to start doing and try to figure out a way to help you is you can see on your screen now is we're basically saying, hey, what if we could help you out practically in 3 different ways? So if you have a need for, hey, I'd love someone actually to evaluate. What if they could actually evaluate my website from the fresh eyes of an outsider, from a digital perspective, evaluate the language, the approach, all of that process, and then actually spend an hour with me showing me what they learned and then recommended best practices. So that's the website evaluation. Another option that we're talking about is a service evaluation. So your online service, so we'll probably watch about 3 or 4 of your services and give you feedback from the whole programming approach from a digital perspective, transitions, the communication. We're not going to focus on just the message, but the whole service overall, and try to give you best practices in context to your context, for things you can figure out how to make it better. And the last thing is social media evaluation that says, wow, what about all the different channels of our Twitter or Facebook, our YouTube and Instagram? We love someone to look at that, look at our language, look at our branding, and then give us feedback to evaluate, kind of do an audit, and then give recommended best practices for an hour-long conversation. So you can go, if you're interested in doing that, you can go to tinyurl.com/North Partners. That's tinyurl.com/North Partners. And as you can see, if you decide, hey, that's something I want to do, and you do it today or tomorrow, there's a discount code, digital20. So thank you. If you're interested in that, you guys, we're also going to send you an email following this that's going to have this webinar with the Q&A as well as a discussion guide. So you and your leadership and your team might want to figure out, all right, so how do we evaluate and help figure out what we're doing well, what we want to improve on? We have some discussions based upon these steps that will walk you and your team through that process. And in that email, there will also be next steps if you're interested. So Justin, my last question here before we go away is, this is a lot of information, a lot of great principles that we've talked through, and a lot of great practical ideas. But what's the one thing, because this could be overwhelming for some of us. So what's the one thing you recommend? Like if you're going to walk away today, tomorrow as well, what's one thing that I can do to actually start creating an effective digital church strategy?
Yeah. Well, you've probably invited an unchurched person to your church service at some point. I would say call one up, message them, get them to check out your church online and get their feedback. Ask them questions like, is there anything here you would find interesting? Give me an honest answer. Or does this feel like it would be helpful to you? And I totally want to hear your honest answer. And, see what they say. Invite them to watch your service on YouTube and ask them for their feedback after the fact. Get them to go to your Instagram, get them to go to your Facebook and your website. And then go back to them with your notebook open after the fact. A lot of the same things that we do in a physical space, we also need to be doing in a digital space, including this, even if the actual plan that comes out of it might be a little different. So I would say start there.
That's great. Justin Piercy, Digital Ministry Director, thank you so much for your time today and sharing. We really have you. I think we all have a heart to help churches, and everybody's trying to figure this out. So we really appreciate you bringing kind of your experience and your wisdom to bear with everybody today. So if people have a desire to follow you on social media, anything that would be helpful for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't tweet though, so don't try there. But I am on Instagram at Justin Piercy. You can find me there.
That's great. Well, thank you, Justin. And thank you everybody for joining us today. We hope this helps you guys go further, faster in your desire to reach people for Jesus. Thank you. Have a good day.